Hi, Zach Couples here from ZachCouples.com. I want to talk to you today about diaphragmatic breathing. I think this topic is incredibly important because there are a lot of misconceptions out there surrounding what a good diaphragmatic breath is. And it is up to me as a steward of the science and a physical therapist to show you beautiful, sexy people what good breathing looks like and what it does not. In order to understand what it means to take an effective diaphragmatic breath, we have to understand what the goal is of a diaphragmatic breath. The goal of that activity, breathing that is to have maximal gas exchange within our bodies. So we take a breath of air in, we bring oxygen in, that helps oxygenate the tissues, does some wonderful things to blood pH, a lot of other cool stuff, don't worry about it. As we exhale, carbon dioxide leaves our systems, which is how fat loss actually occurs. We exhale out some of the byproducts from our fat. We manage blood pH. We do a lot of wild and crazy cool things just by breathing air in and out. It's an important function for us to do well. In order for us to get effective gas exchange, it would probably be a good idea if we filled the lungs to as best of a capacity as we can and in all directions. We don't just want the lower portions filled up, we just don't want the upper portions filled up. We want the lung to fill as a whole. In order for that to happen, we have to make space for the lungs. So as I breathe in, I should have the diaphragm, which is the muscle that separates the top portion of our torso, the thorax, or the rib cage, from the lower portion of our torso, the abdominals. But what has to happen is the diaphragm has to descend, like so, to allow the lungs to fill top and down. What also has to happen is the chest has to expand. So these portions, the front portions of the lungs, fill. What also has to happen is the backside of the lungs have to fill. So we should see some expansion of our upper and mid backs. That will allow the lungs to fill entirely. More oxygen into the system, more potential oxygen to the tissues, more carbon dioxide we can blow off. That's normal. Now, in order for me to create that space, I have to have a certain amount of pressure develop within the rib cage, one, but also within the abdomen, two. So what needs to happen is the diaphragm has to descend in such a manner that those pressures are relatively equalized. I want you to picture a can of pop. And yes, it is pop, because if you're from Illinois like I am, you call it pop. If you're someone who calls it soda or whatever, move on to the next video. But let's look at this pop can. This thing is highly pressurized, meaning you have to take a decent amount of force to be able to get it to explode. That's normal. We want that pressurized system so the pop can stays filled with pop and the product stays fresh. We want that same principle in our bodies. We want a maintenance of pressure in all directions. So the filling of the lungs in all directions allows us to maximize pressure from here up in the rib cage. But we also have to have that happen downstairs in the abdominal region. So as the diaphragm descends, when we inhale, we need something in our abdominal region to push against the abdominal wall in all directions. Not just the front, but the sides, the back, and down low, too slow. So the way that happens is by the diaphragm descending, and the guts, the intestines, the genitals, all of the stuff in this area pushes out in all directions against the abdominal wall and pushes downward into the pelvic floor, which also descends simultaneously with the diaphragm. That's normal mechanics. So what we should see is as the diaphragm descends, we get 360-degree expansion in the rib cage, we get 360-degree expansion in the abdominals, and we should also get some expansion into the upper rib cage, and the pelvic floor should descend. These are normal mechanics. That allows for pressure to be maintained throughout the torso and the pelvis to allow for maximal gas exchange, which is key to our health and key to effective breathing. Now, what happens if I don't do that? What happens if I coach just a belly breath as opposed to 360 degrees, if you please? Well, what would happen is you do not get an even pressure distribution between the top portion of the torso and the bottom portion. What has to happen, instead of us getting this pressurized can like we did with our pop can earlier, we get this happening. So there's an alteration in the even amount of pressures. The diaphragm, as opposed to just descending, has to descend maximally and then push forward. That puts a little bit more stress on our lower backs. That's no bueno. That would be like finding, instead of a can, a normal pop can, you find a dented can. How easy is it to crush a dented can compared to a can that is filled with pop? Much easier, because there's not that even distribution of pressure. Think of the same thing happening to us if we are only belly breathing and not moving our chest and our back and the sides of the rib cage along with it. You shouldn't be a fan of having a dent in your can. And you doing a belly breath is like denting the can. You cannot get adequate pressure development in all directions. You cannot get effective gas exchange. And when we're talking about utilizing breathing in things such as lifting weights or other physical activity, you're putting your spinal contents at risk, because part of that pressure development ensures that there is stability within the spine. So if you want to maximize your breathing capabilities, whether it's meditation, whether it's doing mobility work, or whether it is lifting very heavy weights, you want to ensure that you get full circumferential expansion of the abdominal region, of the torso region, and then top-down expansion as well of the ribs and the pelvic floor. And if you do those things, if you take an effective breath by some of the means that you're going to read about in this article, then you ought to be in business. Zach Couples here, signing off. Deuces.